Winning an election is easy. Actually, governing is a much more difficult thing. It's a trite but universal lesson of all presidencies where in our two-party system, disparate coalitions come together to dream before an election. And inevitably, then somebody is disappointed when actual decisions have to happen. As usual with administrations, especially with one as loosely defined as Donald Trump's, the knife fights start early, and sometimes even on Christmas. I'm referring, of course, to the massive Maga civil war that has taken place over the Christmas holidays that began with the critique over H1b visas, then a tech right versus MAGA right fight about who really is in power, and then a racist versus globalist fight over who's really an American, and it ended with one of the most extraordinary posts I've ever seen from Vivek Ramaswamy. It basically said white people are lazy. So let's start with a roadmap, and let's go from the beginning. Things got kicked off when, full disclosure, a personal friend of mine, Krystal, he was appointed by Donald Trump to be an advisor to the incoming administration on AI. Sriram is a former venture capitalist of A16Z who in the past had vocally supported an increased number of H1b visas and uncapped country quotas for green cards. Now, this set off an immediate firestorm of criticism from the MAGA universe, who saw the Sriram appointment as a betrayal of Trump's promises to reset U.S. immigration policy and as a corporate giveaway. Some of the discussion was just genuine racism against Indians to the U.S., but what was really interesting was to actually see the conflict begin from grassroots day one supporters versus many newly arrived technology sector Trump supporters who were at direct odds. Many of these people supported Trump from the tech sector were shocked that the movement they aligned themselves with, including other venture capitalists and others engaged in these big fights online, were trying to justify the H1b visa. But the ultimate tech-aligned right-wing figure that weighed in with Elon Musk tweets this quote: "The reason I am in America, along with so many critical people who built SpaceX, Tesla, and hundreds of other companies that made America strong, is because of H1b. Take a big step back and fuck yourself in the face. I will go to war on this issue, the likes of which you cannot possess." So why the emotion there from Elon Musk and others? Obviously, for tech entrepreneurs who supported Donald Trump. The truth, beyond any personal interest, is that H1b visa is what the entire U.S. technology industry runs on. And the dirty truth is that it exploits both the workers themselves and the U.S. workers who they are competing against. So let's define some terms. What the hell is the H1b visa? H1b visa is basically a supposedly high-skilled guest worker program, otherwise known as a specialty occupation visa, created by the United States Congress in 1990. The justification for the visa, which has an annual cap of $85,000 per year, is that high-skilled industries like technology and engineering, that there's not enough available talent in the United States. Thus, the H-1B allows the so-called best and the brightest of the world to come to the United States to work for a specific company in a specific role for 3 to 6 years before they become eligible for a green card. In theory, it's very easy to see how this visa category was created, but in practice, it has become very controversial for the major reliance of the U.S. technology industry has on it. H-1B visa holders are not allowed to easily switch jobs without risking their immigration status, effectively chaining them to the original sponsor for the visa, and systematic study has now shown us that the H-1B visa holders depress wages for U.S. citizens because they are willing to work for less for the benefit of being able to emigrate to the United States. Now, those who defend the program say we're only talking about 100,000 or so visas a year here. These people fill jobs that Americans, according to them, are not qualified to do. So let's actually dig into the numbers and just take a look at this. Norman Matloff, who has weighed in with the definitive piece here, and so I will quote him from length from Compact Magazine. H-1B advocates like to point out that 85,000-year visas is only a small fraction of overall STEM employment. But that is misleading. Assuming a 6-year stay, the nominal time limit, at any given time, there would be 500,000 visa holders in the country. More importantly, the impact is cumulative. The H-1B worker who transitions to green cards becomes a permanent fixture in the labor market, especially tech-heavy regions. In 1990, 30% of Silicon Valley engineers were foreign-born. By 2014, that figure had jumped to 74%. So let's think about that. We're talking here about a sector of our economy which is roughly 20% of U.S. GDP and almost entirely responsible for the growth of all of our stock indices. And the vast majority of these engineers are not from here. That's not bad per se, but it does raise a question. Why? Who's benefiting from this? Here again, basic labor law, supply and demand come into play. If you run a business like we do here, what's the #1 pain in the ass? Staff turnover. So what do you do when you want to prevent staff turnover? How do you prevent that person, if you employ a US citizen, from leaving? You pay them more and you try to have good working conditions. How does that work with an H1b? Actually, you can pay them less and they can't leave. That's a good trade. Easy way to juice the stock price, you reduce employee compensation, you get more riches for yourself, and you don't have to deal with one of the biggest threats to any business, talent leaving. Now, the H1b visa holder themselves might be miserable in the job, but he or she has other things on their mind, like, oh, listen, I've only got a few more years where I have to take this, then I can get a green card. Once that happens, I'm free. I can do whatever I want. So you sit there and you take it. The person who loses out here is the applicant, who is a native-born US citizen. Because of their rights, can leave whenever they want. Furthermore, there is no implied compensation like there is for the H1b visa holder. The citizen already lives in America. The H1b visa holder can accept less because a big part of the benefit is getting to stay. Now here again, Matloff weighs in by noting a University of California, Berkeley study that shows that high-tech engineers and managers have experienced less wage growth than all of their counterparts nationally. How is that possible? We are talking again about the fastest growing sector of the US economy. Wages should be booming, and yet they're actually growing less than average. Again, it's very simple to see why. With the vast majority of jobs at these tech companies now held by H1b visa holders, technology companies can depress industry standard wages and keep out these troublesome US citizens. Worse, in many cases, US citizens themselves can be fired to be replaced by H1Bs. They take a look, for example, at this recent report from 60 Minutes, where a former IT administrator for a hospital in the state of California describes the anguish of being fired and then forced to train his replacement.
What did they say to you?
We are sorry to inform you that as of February 28th, you'll no longer have a job. We're going to outsource your position to this company in India.
To a company in India?
Yes, sir.
Harrison was told he could stay on the job, get paid for 4 more months, and get a bonus if he trained his replacement.
Now I'm being told that I not only going to lose my job, but I also have to train these people to take my job.
Are you angry?
Pissed. That exceeds angry. I'm really not a violent guy. I love people, but I've envisioned myself just backhanding the guy as he's sitting next to me, trying to learn what I know. And I was like, God, please don't let them send anybody to sit next to me to shadow me. I don't want to do this. I really don't.
Harrison and his colleagues staged a protest outside the medical center. His fellow worker, Senior Systems Administrator Kurt Ho, is losing his job too. He had just trained his replacement from India.
I think for once we're going to stand up as Americans and say enough is enough. We're not going to take it anymore.
So, with all that in mind, is it really such a surprise that Elon Musk is willing to go to war for H1Bs? A basic perusal of the data shows us that Tesla is the 16th largest H1B employer in the United States. Yes, far behind Amazon and Cognizant, a company that does IT systems, or Infosys, or IBM, or Microsoft, or Meta. Do you get the picture here? Technology giants. So let's make clear that this is about money for them. But to obfuscate that is where Vivek Ramaswamy comes in. During much of the debate around H1Bs, what many tech leaders basically came to admit is that they prefer predominantly H1B workers from India because they work harder than Americans. Implicit in that is they say Americans are lazy. It was implicit until Vivek just said that out loud, which I know you've heard some of this, but it's really worth ruminating on. The crux of Vivek's post is that Americans are fat, lazy, and that our culture venerates the quote jock instead of the math Olympiad like him. Per Vivek's formulation, the reason that top tech companies hire foreign workers over Native Americans is because Americans, and particularly white Americans, are lazy. He blames this on cultural degradation and obviously personal feuds that he had growing up, where he watched Corey from Boy Meets World and Zach and Slater from Saved by the Bell get venerated instead of math Olympiad nerds like himself. Now, Vivek's prescription is that Americans instead should adopt a parenting culture like the one he was raised in, the immigrant striver model model, best known to Americans from the book Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother by Amy Chua. And in the meantime, of course, you need more H-1Bs. Now, this might be a surprise to the Vivek Ramaswamy of 2023 who called for the end of the H-1B visa system, but nonetheless, let's take it seriously. As I laid out in my own lengthy response to Vivek, Vivek is not wrong that many companies hire foreign-born workers or children of immigrants because they work hard, but he is wrong in thinking it is somehow implicit to these groups and not one that Americans have not always had in their own culture. It's certainly true much of our culture today revolves around hedonism, gambling, drinking, getting stoned, but the fact is that as a solution is as American as apple pie. You just have to return to what we all once valued. In fact, in the period before World War II, many Ivy League schools and other so-called prep schools for the American elite explicitly emphasize athletics, social skills, and leadership over rote memorization and academics that is characteristic of much of Asian parenting today. The reason they did that is because if you lay a foundation for discipline through sport and you create well-rounded leaders, you can combine that with academic inquiry to create the entrepreneurial culture that gave birth to the American culture that beat the Axis powers in World War II and put a man on the moon. If Vivek's model of parenting was a solution for greatness, then you would see the greatest companies in the world being built in China, India, Singapore, Korea, and Japan. And look, as much as you all know I love Japan, let's be honest, it's not the case. The reason so many people want to immigrate to the United States and are willing to do so, even undercut US wages, is because this is the place where you have, or at least had, the best shot of being whoever you want to be. As I lay out in the very reason that Indians succeed in the US is precisely the dynamism, frontier spirit, and foundation laid by the American founding fathers. It is by combining their cultural rejection of hedonism and now current focus of the family unit with hard work that they are able to achieve such stupendous success in such a short period of time. And absolutely none of this is intrinsic to being Indian. It is the same story of small, high-achieving immigrant groups. The lesson for us all is a universal one. Pure consumerism, individualism, hedonism in an atomized America as a way that we have today will lead to ruin. The way that you get out of it is not to bring in guest workers who have yet to be tainted by this, but instead to reinvigorate the spirit of the United States and refocus all U.S. government policy on the prosperity of the American family over the prosperity of shareholder capitalism. Vivek and Elon's proscription is actually the one that is truly anti-American. It effectively believes America is so deracinated and lazy, it can no longer accomplish what it once did without foreign guest workers. This only makes sense if your civic ideal is to increase a company's shareholder value. But as I said in my response to Vivek, if you prioritize a reinvigorated civic nationalism, that will inevitably clash with capitalist interests. In my opinion, we should have no more widespread immigration to the U.S. for the foreseeable future. Our foreign population is just far too high, and at any time in U.S. history. We have nearly flooded this country with 20 million illegal immigrants in a short span of a few decades, and all of the signs of ethnic strife that we saw 100 years ago have returned. At that time, when the similar levels of high foreign-born population reached a crescendo, the United States effectively shut down the vast majority of immigration. In that 40-year or so period, something happened. Interesting happened. People went from Irish American or Slovenian American or German American to just American. Racist nativism, which was fueling the KKK, actually disappeared for a generation, and the country that put a man on the moon was born. Now, this was directly at odds with the oligarchs of their day, who also relied on cheap labor from Europe's poor to flood their factories. But nonetheless, the population understood at that time it was near a breaking point. It is my opinion that is what we need again. And with the popular vote for Donald Trump, I think some of you feel the same. But even if you do not, what I at least hope to convince you of this in this monologue is of what the U.S. immigration system today has become, a vehicle for corporate interests to protect their profit and have your interests secondary. You do not even have to agree with me on immigration levels to get that. I will prove it to you by ending with some words from a U.S. Senator. I'll tell you his name at the end. Quote, "The primary purpose of H1b and other guest worker programs is not to employ the best and the brightest, but instead to replace American workers with lower paid workers from abroad who often live as indentured servants. The cheaper it is to hire guest workers, the more money the multi-billionaire owners of large corporations make. Multi-billionaire oligarchs in big tech should not be allowed to hire guest workers to fill entry-level and mid-level IT jobs. Those jobs should be going to American workers who have the constitutional right to form a union and collectively bargain for better wages, benefits, and working conditions. It must never be cheaper for a corporation to hire a guest worker from overseas than an American worker. Mr. Musk, Mr. Ramaswamy, and others have argued we need a highly skilled and well-educated workforce. They are right, but the answer, however, is not to bring in cheap labor from abroad. That was Senator Bernie Sanders writing for Fox News. So perhaps there is a bipartisan future on this issue, at least, ahead of us. I mean, it's been interesting to watch the...
Hey guys, obviously I had a lot of thoughts on what Saagar had to say there. So if you want to see my thoughts on this monologue and every other Saagar monologue, make sure you subscribe at breakingpoints.com.